So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Josh Moore, Assistant Director of the Student Press Law Center. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Student Press Law Center is the nation's only legal organization devoted exclusively to defending and advancing the free press rights of student journalists. So for more than 50 years, we've been here to help students and educators navigate the law, strengthen their reporting, and stand up for press freedom. So if you're a student journalist or educator with a legal question or concern at any point throughout this school year, we hope you'll reach out to us. We have a free legal hotline on our website at splc.org, which we'll share the link to in a minute. We'll also be sharing a lot of other resources throughout the conversation as we progress tonight. So yeah, we really appreciate you joining us for this briefing on the state of the student press. These days, student journalists are reporting essential stories and increasingly filling a void in our local news ecosystem by being the experts on covering their peers, campuses, and sometimes even their communities. They're really at the center of so many of today's big stories and cultural battles, which also comes with so many obstacles and threats to their reporting. Meanwhile, they face a lot of the same issues as their professional counterparts: distrust, harassment, financial distress, sometimes even arrest. So as this new school year gets underway, we wanted to step back for just a moment to talk with some fantastic student journalists about some of those challenges, as well as what we're all expecting for the year ahead. We're not going to get to every issue, but we will try to move quickly through some important topics that we've heard from students throughout the past year. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat or the Q&A function throughout the conversation, and we're going to save some time at the end to try to get to some of those. So feel free to be thinking about those throughout the discussion. Just to get us started, I want to introduce the speakers for tonight. First, Greta Reich is a returning editor-in-chief of the Stanford Daily, which just in the past couple of years has broken some major stories, seen one of their reporters arrested while covering a campus protest, and just recently joined a lawsuit that highlights some of the free speech concerns with recent immigration enforcement actions. So we're going to talk about some of those things. Myesha Phukan just graduated as editor of the Oracle at Mountain View High School in California, and now she's a student at UC Berkeley. Myesha was part of a group of students who won SPLC's Courage and Student Journalism Award last year for their ongoing efforts to fight censorship, which she's going to tell us about a little bit. Mike Hiestand is SPLC's senior legal counsel, who's been working with student journalists since joining SPLC as an intern back in 1989. And Jonathan Gaston-Falk is SPLC's staff attorney and a long-term education lawyer. Tonight's conversation is going to be moderated by Gary Green, our executive director. And before joining SPLC, he was a long-time photojournalist and journalism educator. So happy to turn it over to you to start the conversation, Gary.
Thanks, Josh. And thanks, Greta and Myesha and Mike and Jonathan, and certainly everybody on the call. We're really hoping that this is going to be an informative, casual conversation that kind of pulls the curtain back a little bit on the work that we do, shares a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities that student journalists across the student media landscape are dealing with, and just help us connect a little bit more with our audience and those of you who follow our work daily, that call us daily, that support our work, that are just vested in making sure that student journalists are successful. I think I thought about how I wanted to start off this conversation today, and I don't know how many times I've heard just today the word unprecedented. It is unprecedented how many times we use the word unprecedented in today's conversations. And it seems like every moment that we feel like the temperature can't rise anymore, it can't get any odder, any stranger. I don't want to say worse, because not everything is as dark and heavy as it feels. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we definitely want to talk about some of the big challenges that are out there, and really look at a macro level about how student journalism is navigating this really seminal moment in time. And then here's some micro level stories from Greta and Myesha and what they're experiencing on the ground, and then get some perspective from our experts on our legal team with Mike and Jonathan. So maybe to get us started a little bit, for those of you who don't know, that Mike is our national treasure, and we are so fortunate to have him on our team. He's been here for 35 years. Do I have that right, Mike?
And about that,
has fielded about 20,000 or more calls on our hotline from student journalists and advisors during that time frame. And I feel very confident in saying that he is the foremost expert in student journalism and working in this space. And somebody can fact check me on that, but I feel pretty good putting that out there right now. But Mike, looking back since over the last 3 decades and a half since you started working here as an intern, can you give us just that 35,000-foot perspective of what this moment in time is, and how things have changed for student journalism in the course of your time with the Student Press Law Center?
Well, Gary, it's unprecedented. I hate that word. I do. I use it all the time, but it's the word that works. I think I've kicked off, probably I think 34 different school years with the Student Press Law Center, back to school sort of things. And never. I mean, I genuinely feel, a pit in my stomach. I mean, there is something afoot. I mean, I truly do feel. I think we can say that since 2020. I mean, we haven't had kind of a regular year since then, but it just keeps ratcheting up, and it just seems, as you watch everything starting to develop here, that this is a year. I mean, this is going to be a year that we're going to be talking about for a while. I mean, the attacks, we're going to talk a lot about a number of these things, but I mean, just the attacks on students. I mean, we crossed lines last year with arrests of reporters at Stanford, at Dartmouth, detainment at other universities. We, really crossed the line in March this year. First, as we watched what happened at Columbia University with Mahmoud Khalili, and then for student journalists in particular, it was such a big line that we crossed when we watched Ramesa Ozturk at Tufts University and what she went through. And it all comes down. I mean, the evidence is showing very clearly. We thought, from the beginning, it was just because of this op-ed, this entirely 100% lawful op-ed, an op-ed like I've seen student journalists write for decades, and not have any sort of problems with. But it was that op-ed that ended up in her detainment. I mean, just that horrific detainment experience that she had, in Boston, and then she was whisked down to Louisiana, and was detained down there. And again, just for doing the sort of work that she wasn't a student journalist, she was an op-ed writer, but for doing the sort of work that journalists, that many of us on this call are going to be doing, on a regular basis this year. And then we see, the attacks on colleges by this administration, and colleges themselves, starting with Columbia, many of them taking a knee, as they say, really bowing to that pressure, and bowing in significant ways that impact student speech, and again, in ways that we haven't seen before. I mean, just in the last couple of days, after the killing of Charlie Kirk, I mean, we've seen members of the administration, people, that are working on behalf of this administration, come out and start saying, he was indoctrinated at college, and really pointing to the college experience as kind of being, the basis for, some of the things that are happening, with no evidence whatsoever, but really, again, going after colleges, going after students on colleges. And then, and we were going to talk a little bit later about some of the impact it's having on high schools. I mean, it doesn't just stop with colleges. So, we've seen, these last few years, again, have been things that I've not seen before. And it just feels this year as though, things are coming ahead. I mean, we did not have a summer at the Student Press Law Center for the most part. I think our hotline quieted down for about 2 weeks, but we are up now and roaring, and in ways that we don't normally see at this time of year. So, I think it's the 2025-2026 year school year is going to be one we're going to be writing about this year, but talking about for years to come, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. And maybe if there's any silver lining in this, that it's strengthening the fact that student voices really matter, and people are paying attention to the work that they're doing. Josh brought this up earlier, but the work of student journalists is really playing a much larger role in our news and information systems, to the point that it's got the attention of the most powerful people in government. And so, whether that attention is unwarranted or not, what we know now is that student journalism is really a key player in how we're educating and informing our communities. And so we got to do everything we can to protect the work that they do. I'm going to pivot over here to Greta and Myesha in just a moment and get some insights from them about how this climate is really impacting them on their individual campuses and their own student experience. But Jonathan, is there anything that you want to add to what Mike just provided as far as perspective? And just, you've been with us for a much shorter time, but certainly you're in the trenches every day. You come from an education background. Certainly the education system has been under assault. We've got the rule of law that has been challenged. Some might even say we've been in a constitutional crisis. We've got new lawsuits filed every day, today to the New York Times for $16 billion. The impact of that on our work as student journalists, I think, provides really helpful context for our conversation today. But is there anything specific within your work that you want to add and help kind of set the tone for today's conversation?
Just briefly, I think if we're paying attention to our reticence to cover certain things, whether that's about what we're talking about today or otherwise, pay attention to that, whether there is what the law likes to afford, what courts will call a chilling effect on your voice, on what really interests you as student journalists, or if your advisor's joining us today, and that's regardless of whether you're college or high school. If you feel as though there's some sort of external pressure that is coming down on you and preventing whatever that search for truth happens to be, pay attention to that, because that's changing. The face of that chilling effect is changing over time. Every example that was just raised in the last 5 minutes of things, new specters that we're facing from all corners, those can all function as chilling effects. And so if you're paying attention to that, maybe if you bring that to our free legal hotline and have us help you strategize through that, like, is it a board of education that you're coming up against if you're in the high school setting? Is it an administrator, a dean at your college that you're dealing with? Or is it just that internal pressure that you're not worried about an individual coming to you, but you yourself are stifling that voice, that you're the best suited, I think we raised here, you're the best suited to cover that news on your campuses or in your communities. Please pay attention to that, because we want to help you get through that chilling effect that's happening, I think, from every vantage point now.
Thank you, John. That's a great segue. And I would just add that if you're not questioning your decision making about covering a controversial story right now, I'm just wondering if you've got ice in your veins, because if you've got a pulse right now, you've got to just be watching and just wondering, if I write this, what kind of reaction am I going to get? That just means you're human. And so, Greta, maybe you can start us off on a conversation a little bit. You have a very challenging job as editor-in-chief of a very high-profile student publication that has certainly been in the news enough in the last couple of years. But talk to us a little bit about how this climate is impacting your newsroom, your student reporters, your team, and your leadership. How do you lead your paper through this moment? What are you guys seeing and experiencing?
Yeah, I became editor-in-chief February 1st of this year, so about 11 days after Trump's inauguration, which was definitely something I had been told multiple times would be an interesting challenge. It has been definitely a different experience than I've had as a reporter and as a different level of editor in the newsroom, but something that I've found to be incredibly interesting is maybe a bit of a morbid word, but it is interesting to witness and cover. Our newsroom has been at Stanford, as a student body, is an incredibly diverse student body. We have a lot of international students, and our newsroom is relatively reflective of that. And throughout the first 4 weeks of my editor-in-chief timeline, I noticed an incredible switch in how international students were approaching stories and the fear that they had going on. Not only our own reporters, but people that our reporters were trying to talk to, the stories we were trying to cover. Stanford is a really active campus. A lot of protests happen. We have a lot of different people saying different things at any given point. And the people who we were receiving quotes from, interviews from, who wanted their story to be covered was drastically shifting throughout all of last spring and some of winter. It was definitely something that I did not expect to be such a severe switch, even just throughout the month of February, and definitely March and April, when the Columbia and Tufts student papers were going through what they were going through. throughout the summer and throughout a lot of the spring too, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of very friendly professional journalists and people on the Daily's board, professors of mine at Stanford and former mentors from different internships. They were all incredibly helpful in telling me what they thought was the best course of action, and we had a lot of help, which I think being a student journalist is you can't be a student journalist without a lot of help. We're all training and we're all learning on the job, so I think that's something that is something we can't do without people like SPLC who are here to, aid us. And your hotline was definitely used. So yeah, I don't know how much I answered that question, but it's been a really strange journey and it definitely hasn't ended. Our school year hasn't started yet, by the way. We start classes this Monday. So we'll see what happens this fall. I'm going to be the editor until the end of this January, and I feel like I have a lot of experience going into this volume than I did last volume, which is great, but definitely it is a different environment than it was a year ago.
Are you meeting with your team and your newsroom prior to the semester starting and offering them any, words of encouragement or just a general philosophical approach to the year? What's your message to your team as you guys kick things off of what I think we're all anticipating is going to be a pretty challenging year for a variety of reasons that are known and unknown?
Yeah, I'm so fortunate to have some of the best, I think, editors and reporters on my team. Our masthead is truly some of my favorite people and reporters. They do such an incredible job. Um, about half of them are the same as they were at the end of last term. And so we're definitely doing a lot of trainings. And obviously every fall, all of the new reporters and all of our new trainees get like tons of like how to break a news story, how to cover a protest, that sort of training. This volume, we're introducing a lot of how to deal with controversial coverage stories, how to deal with harassment online, things like that, whether it's coming from random anonymous users, students on our own campus. I think one of the best and potentially worst parts about being a student journalist is that the people you're reporting on are the people in your dorms and your dining halls and your classes. So there can be some uncomfortable conversations being had with people you kind of can't avoid. But it also means you have an insane amount of access and you know what's going on. I think joining a student paper is the best thing you can do on a campus just because you will always know what's going on. You have the most like tapped in wire that you can. I have been having a lot of one-on-one conversations with various reporters and editors who have reached out to me over the summer, but also as we go into the school year, this Sunday is going to be our first in-person meeting with the entirety of Masthead, and it will definitely be a chance for a lot of them to ask questions to myself and my executive team about the Daily's lawsuit that's going on that they know about but haven't had a chance to talk about in person with us yet. But yeah, going in, I think the biggest thing is that like we're doing everything we can to keep running and functioning as usual, but things are not as usual, and the current environment has affected us greatly. So I'm really interested to see how this crop of freshmen will react on campus and whether or not things will be different this fall than they were last spring. But I really do feel very appreciative of my editors and reporters because they have been so steadfast and so incredible and working just tirelessly. We've had an insanely busy summer too, which our summer we don't have regular content production, but students are picking up stories left and right, which is so fantastic to see because there's plenty of news to cover.
I appreciate you sharing that, Greta. I want to come back and ask you about that lawsuit in a minute, but I definitely want to pivot over to Myesha for a minute. And Myesha, I know you're a freshman in your first year at college, but you also were leading your high school publication, The Oracle at Mountain View High School. How has this climate impacted scholastic journalism, and how did it affect you as EIC last year and your newsroom and your student reporters?
Yeah, I think I honestly would use the word fear to I guess describe the resounding state of not only our newsroom but kind of our school population as a whole. So to speak more on the high school side, we kind of were ending our year with our print cycles when kind of immigration crackdown started to happen. We saw all these stories coming out, and so we knew that we wanted to write articles on these because obviously they're so important to cover and you can't not cover them. But we found that not only were our reporters kind of hesitant to cover all of these things, we had a number of staff writers who were either Hispanic or had like didn't want to share their immigration status or were worried that that would be a point of concern if they were to write the article. But not only that, with all of the students that we tried to interview, my high school is, I believe, around 33% Hispanic and Latino, so a decent population, and my county has around over 100,000 undocumented individuals in total. And so we definitely were trying to get their perspective in what we were writing. But it was really hard to find people that were willing to talk to us because they were scared of, legal repercussions on them or their families. Even students who were legally residents or under DACA were scared to talk to us because, I mean, as we see now, like ICE has taken American citizens off the street. So it's a very kind of precarious state, I would say. We offered anonymity to, undocumented students who we were reaching out to, and it still was a point of hesitation for them. And they didn't know if they still wanted to do it. And so I think it was a really big kind of sphere of uncertainty around our high school newsroom. And also, I think being like a high school newsroom, a lot of high school journalists are like hesitant in their abilities to cover such like large scale topics. And so that was also kind of a conversation that we had on how important it was to cover things like immigration crackdown, the election, things like that, deportation concerns. But we did have kind of like a lot of hesitation in terms of people were scared that whatever they were going to say would be retaliated against. And I think I'm thankful to go to college now at UC Berkeley, which has like a long-standing history of preserving free speech. But just like literally like 5 minutes before this panel started, I like got a notification that like there's a coalition of more than 50,000 UC employees and staff and students who just filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, alleging kind of violations of the First Amendment and academic freedom. So I think no matter where you go, whether it be like a college campus, whether it be a high school campus, there's so many students and also staff who are scared to speak out and share their opinions because they're scared of what will happen, especially based on what we've seen this administration do.
Yeah, that absolutely shows that ripple effect of all these big national, the impact of all these national headlines when you're seeing people taken in broad daylight. Would you say, Myesha, that you felt like your paper could still cover the community fairly and accurately in that environment, or was the self-censorship just so pervasive at that point that really big swaths of the community and lots of stories weren't getting covered just out of the fear that you talked about?
I think we were, I would say, still decently able to cover a lot of the topics that we wanted to talk about, maybe not as in depth as they could have gone, because we were still kind of reeling from our censorship experience, which I'll talk about later. But a lot of students who were like incoming leadership or incoming seniors were scared to write about, controversial topics for fear of what our school administration might do just because of previous experience. So I think that self-censorship definitely like was present and did hinder our ability to report on certain things, but I think that we were still able to do some reporting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Mike, let's pull back out for a moment and maybe do you want to talk a little bit about our student media alert that we put out last year that really did kind of challenge some long-standing positions and journalistic norms, and then maybe even just provide some granular details about what you've seen on the hotline as far as an increase in calls and just what it's been like to be in the hot seat for you and Jonathan, dealing with that day-to-day hotline increase?
You bet. Yeah. Myesha's experience, just before I jumped on the call here, I was talking with a high school in the Midwest that were trying to do some of the reporting you're talking about how, ICE raids are impacting the community, some undocumented students, and I'm talking to them about, how to use Signal and WhatsApp and, just things that I've never done before. But yeah, I mean, the year started off obviously with the change in the ICE policy that, I said that they were now going to start coming onto campuses and hospitals and things like that. But that, I think, really triggered some concern, and particularly within the high schools. I mean, that's when we really did start to see, high schools in particular wanting to talk about how is this change in a policy impacting our community? How is it affecting students that might be undocumented or their family members or friends? And so, it started off with, some pretty intense conversations. But I would say that in March, I mean, March was kind of the pivotal year I mentioned earlier. Things really kicked off with the arrest and detention of Mahmoud Khalili at Columbia University for speech activities that again, students on American campuses have been engaging in for decades, and protected, and they're doing so. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that we've always kind of felt, I think, proud about our universities. They're these marketplaces of ideas. I mean, if you can't be on an American college campus and speak freely, where are you going to be able to speak freely? So when he was detained for having engaged in this sort of speech that he was involved with there, that was when we started to see this increase in calls to our hotline from newsrooms saying that they were being hit with requests to take down stories, stories that they might have published in previous years, where they just were covering a protest and maybe had interviewed some folks that were at the protest. If they were international students, now they were very alarmed. ISIS said they are going to be looking at social media. Obviously, they're looking at, Ramesa Ozturk's op-ed. And it was 3 weeks later, I think, is when what happened at Tufts University took place. And that's when we just saw, I mean, calls to our hotline just really just spiked. I think our calls went up like 39% or something just in March. But again, people were asking, how do we, we're being hit with all these requests for takedowns. We're not able to go out and actually interview people. They don't want to talk to us. We don't typically, grant anonymity except in extreme cases. What do we do? And so that's why we said, these are, clearly the rules have changed. I mean, when you are detaining somebody for writing a completely 100% lawful op-ed, and doing so in the way that, affecting their lives in the way that these students' lives are being affected, we said we've got to kind of get back out there. We, along with a number of some of the main journalism education groups in the country, for years and years, we've always talked to students about, how you want to be careful when using anonymous sources. There's some risks and there's a trade-off in credibility and things like that. But we said, some of those traditional lessons that we have passed on over the years, they just don't seem to be applicable right now because, again, the landscape has drastically shifted. So yeah, we put out we've never done anything like this before. We put out a nationwide student media alert, just saying just that hey, the rules seem to have changed. Requests for people to take down their stories where they might have made comments. They're just not because they're, it's a problem in their lives or something like that. I mean, this is kind of a fight for survival at this point. They are facing some drastic actions if they get caught up in all this. So yeah, that's why we put out the student media alert. We didn't say, just grant anonymity to everybody. It's still, you need to be careful. You want to, be cautious in that. But again, maybe you want to start thinking about, more freely working with anonymous sources or looking at your takedown policies so that maybe there's a little bit more flexibility there.
We're going to have some time for Q&A a little later before we wrap tonight, but there's a question here that I think fits really well in this current conversation. And really the question is for Myesha and Greta. Are you having trouble recruiting new journalists to work on the student paper? And has the political climate impacted your ability to find students who want to work on the student press, given everything that Mike just talked about and everything that you guys have already shared just about how challenging some of this day-to-day work can be? And I'd like to hear from both of you, so whomever wants to go first. But have you seen an increase, a decrease, some hesitation from students that maybe, I don't know if I want to get involved in that, or what's it look like from your perspective?
I can go first. So we did actually have a lot of trouble. So my whole censorship experience happened in 2023, like the spring of 2023. So like for the next 2 school years that followed, we did have a lot of trouble recruiting and finding people to join the paper, like so much so that one of our classes this year was actually supposed to be cut because there was a lack of enrollment. And so I think that not only has to do with like the political climate and what kind of students are seeing happening to journalists on the field, whether that be professional journalists or journalists on college campuses. There was like 2 staff writers at the Daily Cal that were arrested during summer coverage of protests in San Francisco. And so I think there's a lot of, like I said, like an environment of fear surrounding that. And then I think also, like for me at my paper personally, a lot of people were scared because of what had occurred with our administration or our principal to kind of get involved with something that could potentially affect their chance at college, affect their relationship with administration, teachers, things like that. So on my end, we did have kind of quite a bit of issues like recruiting new students.
Yeah, like I said, Stanford hasn't started yet, so we haven't like this year's recruitment hasn't begun. Stanford has really strict rules about recruiting before like the first week of classes. My hope and kind of what I noticed at the end of last spring, which is typically when a lot of writers kind of fall off in general for the Stanford Daily, is that a lot of our current reporters really kind of doubled down on their work. They noticed a lot of their co-reporters and editors not being able to do things or feeling like they were uncomfortable like reporting on a certain story, and they would happily take it. So I am really hoping that this fall is a similar scenario. I hope students are kind of energized by what's going on and not fearful, at least those who feel comfortable doing so. But it'll kind of be in the next few weeks that I'll see what really happens. If anyone's going to Stanford and wants to join the Daily, please do.
Thank you, Greta and Myesha. And so I want to pivot a little bit now because we're officially entering into protest season. That feels like it's been going on for a couple of years nonstop now. And definitely I anticipate it's going to ramp up in the near future here. Jonathan, I wonder if you want to take us into a conversation about how to cover protests safely and responsibly and accurately and not end up in jail and not get hurt and all the things that we might recommend in that. So you want to take us away on some protest conversation?
And quickly too, but certainly my brief assessment here and delivery is only surface level. We have excellent resources on our website. We can also do an SPLC in the classroom, which is a free service to any newsroom where we can pipe in and have a full conversation about this topic like protests and others. Totally free, again, to your newsroom. But some basic takeaways as far as being able to cover a protest safely. So I think I can boil this down into 3 main areas. First being knowing your rights and responsibilities in the particular spaces that protests are going to happen. And I know we've gotten a question about protests in spaces already. And basically, if you know that there's one that's going to happen, certainly on your campus, as an example, know your school's policies on the subject and where some of those contours are. What are the guiding lines of what the school is going to be fine with if there's going to be what's called time, place, and manner restrictions. Any sort of establishment, whether it's public or private, is going to be able to tell you, protesters, to operate within certain boundaries that they are lawfully able to provide for you. And so if they're protesters lawfully in an area, you are, as a student journalist, also you have a legal right to document those protests just alongside of your colleagues or whatever it happens to be, even if tensions are high. Now, with that in mind, the shift that we're seeing, since the motif tonight is the current state of things, we've been hearing a lot of questions about whether the protesters themselves are able to say, oh no, you can't you can't photograph me, you can't videograph me. If they're in a public place, there's a reasonable expectation of privacy that's diminished for those protesters in that public space. That tends to be where a lot of these protests are happening. But that leads me to the point that it might not just be the aggressors for protests, generally, and our materials deal with this, are like law enforcement trying to make it so that their public spaces are free and clear. In the event that there's a legitimate accident or an emergency that happens, there should be that emergency response that's not taken up by passive people taking up that space. If you're ordered to get to the side, get to the side. But the protesters themselves, we're seeing some backlash against even student media to say, I think that you're going to depict me in a certain way, and you're going to be biased because you're media generally, and even if you are student media. And I'd love to hear some of that from Greta as well, as I know that her group has been covering these protests, and we mentioned before that there's been an arrest of that. To that point, if you're given some sort of directive from the police, which for one of Greta's colleagues, that was unclear. But if you're given a directive like what happened in spring at Columbia University campus in the Rotunda Library there, everyone was told to clear out, and people didn't. Some people didn't hear that directive, and that's important. You should be able to have a meaningful opportunity to respond to any sort of police engagement, but certainly always present yourself, if you're a student journalist, neutrally to avoid participating in that protest itself. That's an ethical issue. We can't wear two hats when covering the protest or participating in it. We get a lot of questions about that as well. Second major area after the rights and responsibilities in those spaces, prioritizing your personal safety and your preparation, because these things can turn on a dime. They've always been unpredictable. So bringing along protective gear, whatever that happens to look like. If you have any sort of suspicion that there might be some sort of riot response, to be able to have helmets or masks, staying hydrated, bringing water along with you, and working in pairs for safety and accountability with someone else on your newsroom. Because if both of you have your cameras running, if one is confronted by an authority or even a protester, you have that evidence from someone else. Have that be constantly uploaded to the cloud, some way that if your phone is confiscated, that no one's going to be able to access that. You have the right to that as your own property. If it's police that are asking you for it, it's a Fourth Amendment right for you to be able to keep that secret and keep that, not, accessible to the police. That means disabling that biometric phone access, whether it's face or by thumb or whatever it happens to be, uploading that in real time, and knowing who to contact in case of an arrest. That is a reality for some of these students. Again, to hear from Greta, actually, before my third point, if we could hear from Greta a little bit about, your colleague who had to deal with that most recently.
Yeah, I know SPLC had a huge role actually in helping him. Just for some context for anyone who may not know, in 2024, not this most recent spring, but last spring, the Stanford Palestinian organization groups had a big protest at the very end of our school year that resulted in them storming and taking the president's office for a short period of time, a couple hours. And one of our reporters, Dylan Gohill, was inside the office with them covering the event and was arrested when they were all taken out. And the 12 protesters inside, as well as Dylan, were facing 3 felony charges. The 12 protesters actually still face some charges. And it took Dylan 9 months to get off. He was facing both university accusations and but criminal charges. He, to your point of working in pairs, I was his pair at that protest, and I was, thankfully for me, outside when that happened. There was about 70 protesters overall, and many of them remained outside, and I remained outside with them. He was, unfortunately for him, inside. And yeah, it took a long, long time to get him off. He went through a total a traumatic experience that resulted, thankfully, in nothing happening, but it took a while, and it was something that we'd learned a lot from. I have personally since taken and passed a First Amendment class since that event, and learned a lot about what our rights as journalists and student journalists are on a campus. He really should not have been facing those charges, but it was lawful for them to press those charges. Trespassing of any kind is illegal. Journalists can't avoid that just because they have a press badge. but it was something that the university really did, in my opinion, in bad faith, and something that the Daily has had to do a lot to repair from, but it has been a huge learning experience for all of us. And SPLC played a huge role in advocating for him and really helping Dylan get off. He's one of my good friends as well, so I really am thankful that nothing ended up happening, but it's something that we take incredibly seriously now. The trainings and the SPLC protest guide is actually incredibly helpful in how we're doing that going forward. So I don't know if that really answered too much of your question, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And let's keep in mind too, paradigmatically, what we have to face is just because there is a law, just because there's a policy, it doesn't mean that folks on the ground are going to follow it or even know about it. So some of those, arresting officials that you both had to deal with after the fact, the code of conduct violation for the university, the DA bringing certain charges, we have these rights that we are able to assert. And so the third and final point is to seek clarity in some of these situations. So if you are detained, ask clearly whether you're under arrest, because if not, you're able to walk away. Never sign any documents or answer questions without some legal counsel there. If you do happen to be arrested, there are certain documents that, you can leave if you sign this document, but you're admitting to charges and they might not explain that to you. Understanding those rights, especially those press-specific ones, like the PPA, Privacy Protection Act. Like we have to make sure that when you're coming into this very potentially charged situation, that you do know your rights to avoid some of that unnecessary legal consequence. So that's basically what I have here for you, Gary.
I appreciate that, Jonathan. I want to pivot to another big common thread and theme that we've been hearing over the last couple of years, and it's about the financial security of student journalism. And as many of you know, the media landscape is changing every day, right in front of us. I mean, we have this rising news influencer economy. We have podcasters now with millions and millions of audience members. Traditional student media, traditional legacy media is really challenged in ways it hasn't, we've never seen before. And so, I always like to say we have access to more news and information than at any point in time in human history, but the business model is changing literally right in front of us, and we're all trying to figure out what's going to work and what's going to engage the audience and the news consumers of Myesha and Greta's world. And so one thing that I think, Mike, I want you to come in behind this and give us some perspective on what you've seen on the hotline. But Myesha, you've had a really big censorship case at your high school before you graduated that I'd like you to talk briefly a little bit about that case. And then you shared with us before we came on that actually impacted your own financial security for your student publication at the Mountain View Oracle. So can you tell us just kind of a brief overview of that case and what you saw as a result of that?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like context, in spring of 2023, I, along with 3 other writers, co-wrote an investigative article on sexual harassment at our school because we had heard many stories of it happening, incidents of the school not handling it properly, things like that. And so we reached out to our principal for simply an interview on our school's Title IX policies and how our school treated those cases. And from that, things began to kind of like devolve into her interfering into our writing process. She requested a lot of meetings with the writers of the article first she requested prior review, which essentially we sent her a copy of the draft that we had at that time. And so after that, she had meetings with us, closed door meetings, essentially saying that the story would be devastating for the school, would have a catastrophic effect on the perception of the school and like the lives of the alleged perpetrators. She wanted us to take out names, details, more severe instances of harassment, and things like that. And so ultimately we did self-censor, but we published kind of a watered down, I would say, version of that story in April of 2023. And then after that, in May, we were made aware that our advisor would not be returning. So she was removed from her position as advisor of our paper. And then at my school, you have to take like an introduction to journalism class and then go into like the paper's like production. So that class was also removed or cut due to lack of enrollment, even though enrollment was the same as it had been for like the past 2 years. And so that's what happened in the spring. And then in the fall, our new advisor essentially told us that in closed door meetings that he had with our principal, that she told him that there would be no more essentially funding for our print paper. And so what she said was that we'd have to kind of fund enough money to print. We do 6 cycles a year, so 6 issues a year by ourselves. And so I think financial censorship is also a really big way that administrators can threaten to kind of censor student media programs. In those closed door meetings, she talked about how lucky we were to still have one and how easily like it could be gone. And so we kind of went to parents, alumni, community members, and started trying to fundraise because we were told that we didn't have enough money for a print paper, because our principal essentially wanted it to be like online only, like broadcast, podcast, like that kind of thing, which is still important. But and then after we did that, we had like a couple of alumni and parents email the school to tell them how important the print paper was to them and the community. And then she essentially told us that our advisor had been like lying the whole time and the whole thing was like a miscommunication, and that she actually never intended to take away funding for a paper. So right now, well, last year when I was there, and I'm pretty sure for this year, we did get funding from administration to cover all 6 cycles, but that was definitely a point of contention between like us as newspaper staff and administration in terms of whether they were going to allow us to, or allowed to continue to fund our like paper print version.
Mike, how does that reflect what you're seeing in your position and what we talk about as the death by 1,000 cuts, or sometimes death by one single huge cut?
Yeah, I know. As Myesha talks about financial censorship, it's a thing. So I think, student media, we've all watched, as you mentioned, Gary, the media landscape has been disappearing for a while now. Local newspapers, local news organizations, they have disappeared in many places. We just don't have them there. Fortunately, I think, student media have been buffered from some of that for a while. I mean, we are fortunate in many cases. We do receive a bit of, financial help from our schools and whatnot. So I think we were in a bit better shape than a lot of them, but that has definitely come home to roost at this point. And so we are definitely getting a number of calls from, I mean, just, big time newspapers, the paper at Penn State, the paper, at USC. I mean, some big papers, award-winning papers, been doing great journalism over the years. We're seeing their budgets, significantly impacted right now. So as a lawyer, there's a couple things. I mean, a lot of these battles are going to be fought more in the court of public opinion as opposed to a court of law. Why do we need these papers? What is the value of student media? Why is it that we should be, instilling in our next generation kind of an appreciation for what a free press is and what we do, all those sorts of things. So a lot of that's going to be court of public opinion. What I need as a lawyer, though, if we're going to fight the financial censorship piece, is any sort of content-based motivation. If you can show that part of the reason that they are cutting your budget, they're eliminating your advisor, they're saying you have to go all online, we're going to get rid of the print publication. If you can show that part of that reason is they don't like you, they don't like the stories you publish, they've made it clear, like as Myesha said, I mean, they didn't like the story that they were writing about Title IX at her school, and those were pretty clear threats to me that, hey, we control the budget, therefore we can make your paper go away. If you're at a public school, that is absolutely not the case. If you're at a public college, public high school, if you have good evidence of content-based motivation, emails, phone calls, comments at meetings, think big. And when we were thinking about the sort of evidence you can collect, if you have that stuff, be listening for that stuff, because that's what I need as a lawyer to push back against you. So yeah, no, it's a thing where we're all kind of, we're just like all media, we're all kind of fighting for our survival. But it's definitely a fight that's worth waging. But it does take, especially with the turnover in student media newsrooms, it really is important. If you have a content-based sort of fight with administration in 1 year, save that information, put that away so that future editors, future staff members can pull upon that if they need to.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so we want to make sure we bring leave some time for Q&A. Josh is going to come back in. He's been fielding questions in the background and is going to share some of our questions with our panelists here. Josh, you want to lead us down into our Q&A session?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot. We're not going to get to all of them, but maybe we can go quickly through a couple. As with the Khalil case and yesterday's New York Times lawsuit, the intent seems to be intimidation. What is SPLC and student journalists doing to kind of prepare for an increase in legal harassment or cases where student journalists are staying completely within their rights, but are kind of persecuted anyway? And that's an open-ended question to anyone who wants to take it. So I guess basically, with the expectation of these efforts for intimidation, what are folks doing to prepare? What can they do to prepare?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, we need heroes. I mean, we need folks to continue despite some of the obstacles that they're facing, despite some of the threats. We need people, we need folks to continue doing the work we need student media to continue covering what's happening on their campus. I don't know that we're doing anything special. We recognize that this is happening. I think, we're all, I mean, is Greta mentioned, people started stepping up, when some of the staff members were facing problems, others stepped up to fill the void. I mean, yeah, there's a reason they're going after, they're attacking colleges right now. I mean, young people throughout history have made a significant difference. There have been, during the Vietnam War, they were the ones that stepped up. Most historians say the Vietnam War ended early because, young people took a stand. They were brave. They had their voices heard. We need that to continue. All I can say is we'll do the best we can. We are ready. There are a lot of people that are, they've been activated. We are, prepared to do what we need to make this work, and to get through this period of time.
And just to add to that, as far as some background, locally, Mike and I can't practice in California as an example, practice law, but we have an attorney referral network of friends or media attorneys or otherwise, who we put our audience in touch with if they need representation, like Myesha, the lawsuit that she mentioned. I mean, it takes bravery, like Mike said, to start that lawsuit and be able to follow through with it. So even if you have a case, even if you have some good facts, it requires that bravery and that through line for the student journalists to continue advocating for their rights. And absolutely that's possible. And we are prepared to do that in the upcoming year.
Greta, I wonder if you might be able to touch on something. You were probably already going to go there, but because I see you just came off on mute. But I read in one of your editorials about you and your lead editors having a really long, hard, serious discussion with your board of directors and your leadership team about whether or not you wanted to sign on to your lawsuit with FIRE. Do you want to talk just real briefly? We've got about 7 minutes left in our session, so I don't want to cut that too short, but can you just share a little bit about your decision behind that lawsuit and why you felt like now was the time to really get involved and be that hero that Mike's talking about?
Yeah, hero feels like a strong word. But the decision definitely wasn't easy to make. For those of you who don't know, the Daily is one of 3 plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security, advocating for basically non-citizens to have the same First Amendment rights that citizens do. That the Daily decided to sign on to that ultimately because we have noticed a shift in our newsroom that is not good. We aren't able to cover a lot of stories on campus because students don't want to speak to us, international students in particular, but definitely some like domestic students as well. People just don't feel comfortable sharing their stories, providing Daily with quotes, wanting to write for us, whether that be a news piece, a narrative nonfiction piece, an opinion piece, anything. And we felt like we couldn't continue that way without doing anything. Like Mike said, continuing to do the work and just like still having reporters cover stories and having not all of those stories be related to the political controversies happening. That we are a student paper, we cover what's going on our campus, and a lot of those are random stories that not many people care about except for the Stanford students. But we did want to kind of send a message that we were doing something and we were noticing this, and B, hopefully make some sort of difference and make the lives of the journalists that come after me at Stanford easier. But yeah, it's been something that we're really proud to be a part of, and we are incredibly thankful to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, who's our legal representation. Yeah.
And Garrett,
I think HERO is absolutely appropriate. Go ahead, Mike.
I just want to put a plug in here. Today, we have decided we found an attorney to file an amicus in the Stanford case. And so I'm just going to put out a pitch here. We're going to be asking for help from student editors, from student news organizations across the country to join our brief. One of the things we want to do is, so they're going to be arguing the law. We want to argue what the actual impact is. As Greta said, I mean, we're being asked to take down stories. We're being, some of our staffers who are international are afraid to go out and cover things. I was just talking to, it was heartbreaking. I was talking to a group of about 100 graduate students at NYU last week, and one of them was a foreign student. She came on and she asked, what about me going out to cover protests? And I kind of should have expected the question, but it was just like I hadn't had a student just ask me that directly, and I said, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I don't think I can tell you that it's safe for you to go out and get involved in a hot news scene, a protest scene where there might be law enforcement or ICE officials there. You can't do your job is basically what I told them. It's not safe to do your job in the United States of America at this point. So so we're going to be asking for you folks who are out there to let us know about how the ICE policies are impacting your newsrooms directly. And yeah, we encourage you to pay attention to where that lawsuit is, and we're going to be sending out some materials later on asking for your assistance with that.
Yeah, thank you,
Mike. Yeah, Josh, we got
Great.
like 3 minutes left. Do you have any other really fast questions before we bring this to a close? And thank you, Myesha, for answering some of those questions in the chat. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Myesha. I think maybe this is a good place to end. If we could, and sorry to be unfair, but ask Greta and Myesha in maybe 60 seconds or less to give you an example of a story from the past year that you've been really proud of, to kind of help illustrate the importance of the work that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I have a really quick answer, and it actually ties back to Myesha's high school experience. The Daily last spring published a very long investigative piece on Stanford's Title IX process. It was following one woman throughout her Title IX process at Stanford and how long it took and how complicated it was and the frustrating results of it. It's an incredible story, and our reporters spent months on it, and truly just like details all of the incredible journalism that students can do, especially on a campus where everyone hears rumors about what's going on, but it just is a truly incredible story. It's written by Annie Yang. I really encourage everyone to read it.
Yeah. For me, I think I wrote an op-ed or an opinion article for the last cycle of our print paper on essentially just recounting my experience with censorship and urging the school to maintain the student paper at its strength for years to come. And I think that was one of the pieces of writing that I'm most proud of, because it was kind of a sense for me during my sophomore year. I was so scared to like actually acknowledge it as censorship and speak out against it. And then to me, being able to write the article my senior year was kind of like a symbol of how much I've grown and how much, I care. I really do care about journalism and the state of the student press. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Myesha. Thank you, Greta. Josh, anything else before we close?
I think it's time to wrap up.
I just want to remind everybody that tonight's discussion, obviously, there's a lot of really heavy topics in there, and we would be remiss to recognize that student journalists are the first documenters of history on your campuses, and the work that you're doing is really important, and you're really facing some hard threats and intimidation. But we also want to recognize that journalism is not always supposed to be in the line of fire and this really intense experience. A lot of what we do as journalists is to inform our communities, to help them make better decisions about their lives and to understand their government and understand, the agencies that are really impacting their day-to-day lives. So don't lose sight of that. Remember that journalism actually is fun in many ways. There's very few other, avenues, professional avenues where you get to learn about humanity the way that we can with journalism. So it's so important for me to just remind everybody that when you're facing all these really heavy topics for the work that you're doing, that this really is just the best way to experience humanity, experience society, experience the world. And really, I did not coin this, but I love this phrase that student journalism is the seedbed of our democracy. Everything that you're doing from high school into college, into the professional ranks, and into all the adjacent fields that are influenced by journalism starts with the work that you're doing today. And you all already know this, but we are 100% dedicated to help you do that work. You know all of our resources. Please reach out to the Student Press Law Center, even if it's just because you want to have a conversation with Mike and John to help you sleep better at night and just know that you're not in this alone. We have unlimited resources at SPLC.org. Sign up for our newsletter, reach out to Josh, follow us on social media, come see us at the conferences and have some conversations with us. We love this work. We love doing this to help you guys do this really important work back in your communities. So stay connected with us. And thank you everybody for joining this conversation. Josh will share this, I'm sure, on all of our channels, in our newsletter and everything else. And just know that we got your back. Keep up the great work. We appreciate you guys.